Okay, sorry I couldn't finish this presentation last time. I had a meeting I had to go to, so I'm back now, and I will try to finish this in about 10 minutes or so. Okay. So the 5 phases of the cardiac cycle. So let's share the video. Screen. Screen 1. I'll put myself there. Okay, cool. Okay, so the 5 phases of the cardiac cycle. Okay, so in the initial phase, both chambers are resting. Okay, so the atria has blood coming in. Okay, because there's no valve in front of the atria, so the blood will always come into the atria. Okay, and eventually that blood coming in causes the AV valves to open, and the AV valves open, and so blood goes from the AV valve or from the atria to the V, right, to the ventricle, and therefore, like usually it just flows down because your atria above your ventricles. Okay, the next thing is the completion of the ventricular filling. The atria contracts, so that last little bit of squeezes the last little bit of volume through the ventricles. Okay, so the end diastolic volume, this is a really important number to understand, is the volume in the ventricle at the end of ventricular relaxation. Okay, which means it's the total amount of blood that's in the ventricle. Okay, and that's will be eventually squeezed out somewhere. Okay. All right. So the next thing, the AV valve shut. Okay. When these AV valves shut, they make a sound. That sound is the lump sound. Okay. Okay. So now that wall is shut, there is no more blood going into the ventricle anymore. Okay. So isovolemic ventricular contraction. So both the AV valves are shut, okay, and the semilunar valves are shut, which means there's nowhere for blood to enter. Which means when the ventricle starts squeezing, you start just increasing pressure in that chamber, okay, without changing volume. So isovolemic ventricular contraction, okay. At the same time, the atria relax, okay, and blood starts going into the atria again. Okay. Eventually, the squeezing will cause, the valves the semilunar valves to open because there's only so much pressure that the valve will stand before it opens. So eventually, the semilunar valves open and blood is shot into the arteries. Okay, the end systolic volume is the volume at the end of the cycle. Okay, at the end of the cycle. Okay. Okay. So. Okay. So EGV and diastolic ESV and systolic. First of all, a couple of things to note: EGV has to always be greater than ESV. Okay, because there has to be some fraction of that. Okay. Okay, so that EGV minus ESV is stroke forward. Okay, so EGV is the total amount of blood. Okay. ESV is the amount of blood left at the end. So the change in that is the amount of blood shot out of the heart, and that is stroke volume. Okay. Okay. Clear. Okay. Okay. And then the last thing, the ventricular relaxation and the second heart sound. This is when the semilunar valves close. That's a dub sound. Okay. And again, both valves are shut now, and so no blood changes in the ventricles, and so isovolemic ventricular relaxation. Okay, and then finally the AV valve open when the ventricular pressure drops below the atrial pressure. So when the chamber is relaxing, okay, remember the atria is still filling up with blood. And so eventually the blood pressure in the atria is greater than pressure in the ventricles. And therefore the AV valves will push open and blood will go from the atria to the ventricles again. Okay? All right. So, okay. Some more simple math for you guys to understand. Okay, so the DV minus the SV is equal to stroke. Okay, otherwise abbreviated as SV. Okay. Okay. Stroke volume divided by E is ejection fraction. Fraction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the stroke volume divided by EDV, the diastolic volume is the ejection fraction. Okay. I think I said something before. I was trying to hurry you guys through that. So ejection fraction is the stroke volume divided by EDV. Diastolic volume is the total volume of blood in your ventricle. Okay. The stroke volume is the amount of blood you push out. So one that divided by the total number is the fraction that you pushed out. And that's usually expressed as a percentage. Okay, usually it's around 15, 60%. Okay, so you inject out some of the blood, but not all of the blood. When we talk about exercise, we'll talk much more about how that increases and stuff like that. Okay, so prequel to other stuff. Okay, so there you go. This is the cycle. Okay, you can look at this. Oops, got to erase drawings. Okay, so like you look here, that is the total volume of blood. So this is EDV. Okay, this is the ejection. So this is ESV at F. Okay, and so the total volume. So this is how much is left, and you'll see it's right about half, right? So that's the ejection fraction, usually about half when you're normal. Okay, like when you're not stressed. Okay, and then we will talk about how this changes during exercise and stuff. Okay. All right. Okay, so there's a formula for stroke volume again. Okay, so now a little bit more details. Okay, our stroke volume, okay, is how much blood comes out per pump. Okay, cardiac output is a measure of cardiac performance. Cardiac output is the volume of blood per pump, so 70 milliliters, over the heart rate, how many times your heart pumps per unit time, and that's usually minutes. Okay, so on average, your pump, you set 70 milliliters, okay, on average is 72 beats per minute. Okay, so 70, that is, okay, 70 milliliters per beat, right? So that cancels with that. So it is approximately, it's a little bit over 5, okay, but 5 liters per minute, roughly. Okay, so 5.01 or something like that. That's very close. Okay, 5. All right. So let's take a look at cardiac output. Screens 1. Oops. Share sound. Okay.
Let's take a closer look at the timing of the events during the cardiac cycle. Representing the cardiac cycle as a clock reminds us that the events of the cycle continuously repeat. However, we will need to unwind the clock and lay it out horizontally to relate the major events of the cardiac cycle to one another. Now we can see the unwound clock depicting one cardiac cycle or heartbeat. Notice the 4 phases of the cardiac cycle. Next, we see the pattern of alternating periods of systole and diastole of the atrium and ventricle. But now we will examine the timing of other changes that occur during the cardiac cycle. The electrocardiogram, or ECG, records the electrical activity of the heart. Electrical activity shown in the ECG precedes contraction and relaxation of the atria and ventricles. As the heart contracts and relaxes, changes in pressure occur within the chambers. These graphs allow us to see the pressure changes in the atria, ventricles, and aorta. By graphing the volume of blood in the ventricle, we can see when the ventricle fills with blood and the volume increases, and when blood is pumped out of the ventricle and the volume decreases. The valves of the heart open and close, which ensures that blood can only flow in one direction through the heart. The sounds of the heartbeat are caused by the closing of the AV valves and semilunar valves. For simplicity, these graphs display changes in valve position and pressure associated with the left side of the heart only. But keep in mind, similar patterns would also be occurring simultaneously on the right side of the heart. As you noticed with the red blood cell roundup, the cardiac cycle is conveniently divided into 4 phases based on the position of the heart valves and ventricular activity. As a reminder, these phases are called ventricular filling, isovolumetric contraction, ventricular ejection, and isovolumetric relaxation.
All right. Next thing, so the autonomic division modulates heart rate. Okay, I think that's one of the best things you understand about the autonomic division. But basically how we tinker with the heart is the autonomic nervous system. Okay. Normally it's under parasympathetic control, which okay. Okay. I think they got this switched. This should be decrease. I don't know how they screw this up, but this should be decrease and this should be increase. Okay, so decreases heart rate, increases heart rate. Okay. Okay, so so the less potential, slower heart rate, pacemaker depolarization. That's right. So all of these are right except for that should be decreasing, that should be increasing. Okay, beta receptors. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So beta 1 adrenergic receptors on all cells, which then increases the rate of pacemaker depolarization. Okay. So if you take beta blockers block beta 1, and therefore it decreases sympathetic control, which then increases parasympathetic control, so slower heart rate. Okay. Normally, this is dominated by parasympathetic. Okay, your heart is normally dominated by parasympathetic. Okay. Okay. All right. So there we go. Okay. This usually slows it down, right? So. Yeah. This graph has it right. So this know this stuff. Okay. All right. Okay. So okay. So multiple factors influence stroke volume. Okay. So the Frank-Starling law of the heart. Okay. The heart pumps all the blood that is returned to it. So the stroke volume is proportional to the EDV. So the more EDV, the more stroke volume. Okay. So the more blood that goes in the heart, the more pumps out of it. Okay. Okay. So the EDV is determined by venous return. Okay, because to get blood, the heart has to get it from the veins. So venous return is the dominant thing that determines how much blood gets into the heart and therefore how much blood comes out of the heart. Like your heart can't make up blood, right? So how much blood comes in determines how much blood comes shooting out. Okay. So that's determined by the skeletal muscle pump, the respiratory pump, sympathetic innervation of age. Okay, so what happens when you want more blood to come shooting out of your heart? You need to push more blood into the heart. Okay, one, your skeletal muscle pumps. Okay, when you're exercising, when you're moving, your muscles naturally squeeze your veins more, and that veins have one-way valves, so that shoots blood up the vein into your heart. So more blood goes into your heart. Same thing with the respiratory system. When you breathe harder, you're pushing more pressure on the veins in your chest, and that is pushing more blood into your heart. Okay, the most important of the three it's actually sympathetic innervation of age. Okay, veins as your sympathetic nervous system takes over, your vein diameter becomes smaller, and when the diameter becomes smaller, that means there's less room for blood, so blood travels faster to your heart, and therefore all three things combine to put more blood into your heart. More blood into your heart, more blood comes out of your heart. Okay. So, action, cardiac muscles. Okay. This is not that important. This is okay. So as your muscles stretch, it squeezes harder, and therefore you're pumping out more blood. Okay. So the more the valves, the more the chamber stretches, the more contraction you get, the more blood comes shooting out. Okay. Catecholamines increase contractility, like norepinephrine. So you can see like you get more stroke volume. Okay. Okay. So any chemical that affects contractility is an iotropic agent. So epinephrine, other catecholamines, norepinephrine digitalis, which is a medication, right? And then the negative iotropes, okay? So there we go. The afterload, the ejection fraction, I already explained what all these things are, right? So, okay. There we go. Output. Okay. So, like this is all things I've explained. They just put it in charts to make it easier. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. You guys will have to calculate things like EDV, ESV, ejection fraction, cardiac output. Okay, on your exams. Okay. All right. Part 3 over. Okay, recording.